I come with no other agenda than desperately trying to help people who are in need. And I see that as part of my role, is that why else would I be here if I'm not using this role properly to influence and help people where I can.
It was meant to be a brief, quiet escape, just a royal seeking solace within the stillness of a centuries-old chapel. As Prince William stepped into St. Mary's Church, the air heavy with the hush of reverence, nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but nestled in a pew, a solitary 9-year-old girl sat with an expression that caught his eye. What unfolded in the following moments was nothing short of extraordinary, an unexpected interaction so pure it would leave even the future king visibly moved.
King Charles III begins his reign. Prince William has become heir to the throne.
A quiet Sunday that stirred the soul. On the serene morning of Sunday, April 14th, 2024, St. Mary's Church in Norfolk stood bathed in golden sunlight, its ivy-covered stone walls whispering stories of centuries past. The sky above was a soft stretch of blue, and the gentle breeze carried the scent of applewood incense that lingered just beneath the fragrance of fresh lilies placed near the altar, a tender offering from the parishioners. Everything about the scene spoke of peace, reverence, and quiet routine. One by one, members of the congregation made their way inside. Their soft murmurs and rustling coats blended with the quiet thud of hymnals opening and pews creaking beneath them. Light streamed through the church's towering stained glass windows, casting intricate patterns of ruby, sapphire, and emerald across the ancient stone floor. The colors danced like whispers of something unseen, infusing the church with an almost magical warmth. Amid the quiet arrivals, a familiar face appeared, one that could never truly go unnoticed. Prince William, Duke of Cambridge, entered without fanfare, dressed in a simple navy suit that complemented his calm and composed presence. There was no royal entourage, no photographers, no flashing bulbs, just a man seeking a few moments of stillness in a sacred space. Though he carried the quiet grace of someone born into duty, Prince William's presence was comforting, not commanding. His smile, warm and natural, made him feel like a friend rather than a figurehead. He exchanged soft words and gentle nods with a few locals, his tone humble, his gestures genuine. With practiced subtlety, he settled into a pew near the back, striking the perfect balance between privacy and presence. This wasn't a scheduled visit. This was personal. Away from the demands of palace life and the constant gaze of the public, the prince had come to this quiet corner of Norfolk to find solace, to breathe, and to simply be.
William attends services at significant times of the year, such as Christmas and Easter.
St. Mary's, with its timeless charm and familiar hymns, offered him that rare gift. Yet that morning felt different. There was a strange stillness in the air, not silence, but a hushed anticipation, as if the ancient walls of the church were holding their breath. As the organ began to play, its deep, soulful tones filled the space, echoing through every beam and stone archway. But what was it that made that morning so different? Stay glued to your screen. Something unforgettable is about to unfold. The little girl in the front pew, and as the organ's final notes drifted gently into silence, Prince William remained seated, something still pulling at his attention. The church was beginning to empty. Coats were pulled from hooks, shoes shuffled softly down the aisles, and murmurs of polite goodbyes filled the air. Yet one small figure near the front remained completely still, untouched by the movement around her. At first, she had barely registered in his awareness, a tiny shape nestled among the tall, dark pews near the altar. But now, with fewer people around and the morning light falling just right, the sight of her became impossible to ignore. The way the colored rays from the stained glass windows spilled across her tiny frame made the scene feel almost surreal, like something out of a storybook. She was no more than 9 years old, small enough that her feet dangled far above the stone floor. A cascade of curly brown hair framed her delicate face, bouncing slightly each time her legs swung gently back and forth. She sat alone, quietly absorbed in a worn picture book that looked too old and too treasured to be new. There was something about her, something quietly radiant. Her wide hazel eyes drifted now and then toward the windows, watching the shifting patterns of colored light dance along the stone. It was as if she saw something in those beams of red, green, and blue that no one else could. William couldn't help but wonder, where were her parents? Surely they'd return soon. Yet as the minutes passed and the church slowly emptied, no one came to collect her. Still, she didn't seem afraid or even lonely. She was calm, completely at ease, like she belonged there. And that calmness in someone so young stirred something in him. Was she waiting for someone? Or was this exactly where she was meant to be? He remained seated, quietly watching, trying not to intrude on what felt like a fragile, sacred moment. But as the last of the parishioners slipped through the heavy wooden doors, and only the two of them were left in the stillness, a quiet concern began to take root in his chest. Finally, he stood, his movements slow and careful, his polished shoes barely making a sound against the cool stone. As he approached, he made sure to crouch down gently beside her so he wouldn't seem too tall or overwhelming. His voice, when he spoke, was soft and friendly, calculated not to startle, but to reassure. "Hello there," he said with a warm, kind smile. The girl looked up, surprised at first, her book resting quietly on her lap now. Her wide, hazel eyes met his. There was a moment's pause where neither said anything, just a quiet exchange of curiosity and gentleness. Then, in a soft but confident voice, she answered, "I'm Rosie." William's smile widened. "Rosie," he repeated with warmth. "That's a beautiful name." He kept his tone light, inviting. "Are you here with someone?" Rosie's small hands tightened slightly around the edges of her book. Her eyes flicked around the now empty church before settling back on his. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I came by myself." William's eyebrows lifted slightly, not in alarm, but in astonishment. How could such a small girl have come here all alone? She didn't seem scared, and yet there was something about the way she said it that tugged at his heart. Still crouched beside her, William waited, not pressing her, just being present. The silence between them was full, not uncomfortable but deep and full of meaning. There was something about her that felt wise beyond her years. Something about her calmness that made him feel as though he wasn't the one comforting her, but perhaps the other way around. Whispers of loss, echoes of strength. Prince William stayed crouched beside the girl, his heart quietly aching as he processed her soft response. "I came by myself," she had said, not defiant, not afraid, just stating a simple truth, one that raised more questions than it answered. He took a breath, trying to balance compassion with composure. "Does your mummy or daddy know you're here?" he asked gently, though the concern had already begun to edge its way into his voice. Rosie looked up at him again, her expression solemn, far too serious for someone only 9 years old. She nodded, her fingers still wrapped tightly around the frayed edges of her picture book. "Mummy says I can talk to God anytime I want," she said. "Today I needed to talk to him about Daddy." There was something in the quiet way she spoke that made his chest tighten. It was honest, pure, unfiltered by the kind of words adults often use to soften grief. Her innocence gave the moment more power than anything dramatic ever could. A child, barely 9, had come alone to a church not to play, not to wander, but to pray for her father. William slowly lowered himself to sit beside her on the old wooden pew, making sure to keep his body relaxed, his posture open. He didn't want to crowd her or make her feel questioned, just seen. He offered her a gentle smile and asked softly, would you like to tell me about your daddy?" Rosie gave a small nod, and for a second, he saw a flicker of something in her hazel eyes. Curiosity, sadness, and something else. Something quiet and strong. "Daddy's a soldier," she began. Her voice was even, practiced, as if she'd had to explain this many times. "He's really brave, but he's far away now. Mummy says he's in heaven." The words hung between them like the lingering echo of a bell. William didn't respond right away. He couldn't. He was suddenly reminded of a different church, a different day, September 6th, 1997, when he was just 15, walking behind his mother's coffin. That moment,
It was Harry and William's special request to walk behind their mother's casket as it pushed on towards the Abbey. What courage.
had split his world in two. The pain of losing Princess Diana was something that time had never fully healed. He had learned to carry it, to live around it, but it never truly went away. Looking at Rosie now, sitting quietly with her book and her broken heart, he felt something stir deep within him. He saw in her the kind of silent strength he had once needed in himself. She didn't cry. She didn't speak of unfairness or ask why. Instead, she'd come to a church on her own, carrying her grief like a folded letter, offering it up in whispers and stillness. Her resilience wasn't loud. It was something steady, something noble in its quiet way. And in that moment, Prince William realized he wasn't comforting her. She was teaching him. But what if the child's quiet resilience could teach the prince more than he ever imagined? Stay tuned to find out. Questions from the Quiet Heart. William sat quietly beside Rosie, still moved by her gentle strength. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was full of meaning. The air inside St. Mary's Church in Norfolk on that clear Sunday morning felt sacred in a new way. The soft colors from the stained glass windows danced across the pews, brushing against the faces of the last few worshippers as they quietly made their way out. He watched Rosie for a moment longer. Her small frame looked even smaller now, surrounded by so much stillness, yet there was something solid about her, a quiet grace that demanded attention. She hadn't asked for sympathy. She hadn't even looked for it. And that only deepened his admiration. "That's very brave of you, Rosie," he said softly, his voice steady, though there was a heaviness rising in his chest. "Coming here, sharing this." Rosie didn't look up right away. Her eyes were fixed on the pages of her worn picture book, her fingers gently tracing its edges. The simple rhythm of that movement was calming, almost like a ritual. Then she spoke, barely above a whisper, and William leaned slightly closer, not wanting to miss a single word. "I wanted to ask him," she said, her voice fragile but clear, "if Daddy knows I miss him, and if he can still see me." The words reached him like a wave, small and quiet, but impossible to ignore. William felt the impact of her question deep in his bones. It was a question he'd asked himself many times over the years. He knew exactly what it was like to long for reassurance that someone, somewhere beyond this world, still saw you, still cared, that even in their absence, they hadn't truly left. Rosie wasn't crying. She wasn't pleading. But in that one simple sentence, she had poured out the kind of longing that comes from a place far beyond her age. It was the kind of wonder that lived in every child who's lost someone, and in every adult who never really stopped wondering. She just wanted to know that love didn't end at goodbye. A shared silence. As Rosie's quiet words drifted through the air of St. Mary's Church that April morning, William found himself swallowed by a silence he hadn't expected. Not the silence of the church, but one that lived deeper, in memory, in feeling, in the heart. Her question, so soft and simple, echoed somewhere old and tender within him. He had asked that same question once, over and over again, through the long corridors of Kensington Palace, through years of public appearances where he smiled on the outside and ached inside. Even now, decades after his mother died in 1997, the thought still lingered.
We have reports from Paris that Diana, Princess of Wales, has been killed in a car accident.
Was she still with him somehow? Watching, listening, knowing? And now, here sat a 9-year-old girl in a Norfolk church in 2025, asking the same thing with nothing but a picture book in her hands and hope in her eyes. Her question had no grand ceremony, no dramatics. But it shook him. Because in her words, he heard the quiet ache of every child who's lost a parent, the same ache he once carried like a secret. He glanced at her again and saw it, that flicker of grief behind her steady gaze. It wasn't loud or heavy, but it was there. Not the kind of sorrow that came with tears, but the kind that lived in questions too big for answers. She was searching, not for explanations, but for connection, for a reason to believe that love doesn't just vanish. William's heart pulled tight. He recognized that need. He had lived it. Rosie wasn't just brave, she was honest in a way that few dared to be. Her sorrow didn't demand pity. It didn't make a scene. It simply sat there beside her, quiet but undeniable. And yet so did her strength. A calm, soft kind of bravery that wasn't loud but was impossible to ignore. She didn't hide from her sadness. She walked right into it, hoping to find something still beautiful inside. In that moment, William understood something new. Grief didn't wait for age. It could find anyone, anywhere, and shape them in ways no one else might see. And sometimes it revealed a wisdom not taught in books, but earned in silence and prayer, just like Rosie's. But what if true bravery isn't loud, but quietly carried through grief? Discover how Rosie's strength changed everything. The light of a smile. The air inside St. Mary's Church still held the silence of something sacred. After Rosie's quiet question and William's gentle reply, a stillness settled between them, one not of absence, but of understanding. The soft light spilling through the stained glass windows danced along the pews, touching her curls and his collar with faint glimmers of gold. For a brief moment, the world outside the church faded. Inside, only the voices of memory and comfort remained. William leaned forward, his voice warm, but thick with feeling. "Your daddy knows, Rosie," he said, every word a thread pulled from his grief. "I believe he can still see you. He's with you always, even if you can't see him." His eyes didn't leave hers, and in that quiet gaze, something deeper passed between them. Not words, not gestures, just something felt, a knowing. They were two people from vastly different lives, but bound now by a shared wound, by the invisible threads of love that remained long after loss. William's fingers moved instinctively to the inside of his jacket pocket, brushing against the familiar curve of something he always kept close. A small, silver coin. It wasn't flashy or grand, but it held meaning, more than most things ever could. Engraved on its surface was the image of St. George, sword raised, dragon beneath him. A symbol of courage and guardianship, something that reminded William of his duty, and of the strength he sometimes needed just to keep going. He'd carried it through speeches, through difficult meetings, through quiet days where memories crept in uninvited. It was never just a coin. It was a promise to himself that he could carry the weight, that he was never alone. He drew it out slowly, letting the metal rest in his palm before extending it to Rosie. "This is for you," he said, his voice low and gentle, but steady with meaning. "It helps remind me to be brave. Maybe it can remind you, too, that your daddy is still watching over you." Rosie's eyes widened. Her small hand reached out carefully, almost reverently. As her fingers wrapped around the coin, her grip was delicate yet sure. She didn't speak right away. Instead, she looked up at William, her hazel eyes full of something new. Not confusion, not sadness, but a quiet kind of peace, like a window had opened somewhere inside her. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice small but no longer uncertain. And just then, something shifted in her. A smile broke across her face, not forced or polite, but real, bright, honest. It was the kind of smile that carries its light, that doesn't just reflect the sun, but seems to create it. "I think Dad would like that," she said softly, her voice steady, with a calm strength, far beyond her 9 years. That one sentence reached into William's chest like sunlight through a winter cloud. She wasn't just reassured, she believed it. And in her belief, there was healing. The smile she offered next could have lit the whole church, could have warmed every cold edge of memory inside him. Across the room, a few members of the congregation, men and women who'd come to pray, to reflect, paused as they noticed the quiet scene unfolding. They didn't interrupt. They simply watched, sensing they were witnessing something rare. A moment between a future king and a grieving child. But more than that, a moment between two souls who had each, in their way, survived the storm of loss. The hush around them deepened, not in silence, but in warmth. People watched, some smiling softly, others misty-eyed, touched not by drama but by the profound simplicity of what they saw, a shared sorrow, a simple gift, and the smallest of smiles that carried the weight of hope. Echoes of laughter and love. That quiet smile still lingered on Rosie's face as the warmth in the church wrapped around them both like a soft blanket. William remained seated beside her, not speaking at first, simply letting the silence settle. It was the kind of silence that wasn't empty, but full, peaceful. He didn't want to rush it. He could see something shifting in Rosie, a little lightness in her shoulders, a quiet comfort. She looked up at him again, eyes curious but calm now. And then, almost shyly, she began to speak. Not about heaven, not about grief, but about the man she missed so dearly. "Daddy used to take me to the big park in Richmond," she said, her fingers still curled around the silver coin. "He would push me on the swings so high I thought I could fly." Her voice held a soft music, each memory a note. Sometimes he sang silly songs that didn't even make sense, but they made me laugh so hard. William listened closely, as if her words were threads weaving something invisible between them. These weren't just stories. They were echoes of her father's presence, still alive in her heart. The way she spoke, the tiny details, the creak of the swing, the rhythm of his footsteps beside hers, brought her memories to life. It reminded him so vividly of how, after his own mother's passing in 1997, he would hold on tightly to the way she smiled, the way she hugged him, the way her voice softened when she spoke to him and Harry before bed. He understood that what Rosie was doing now, remembering out loud, wasn't just reminiscing. It was healing. Rosie continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Sometimes Mummy cries when it's quiet, so I tell her jokes, even the bad ones Daddy used to tell." She giggled, just slightly. She laughed sometimes, not always, but I think it helps. William felt something stir deep in his chest. This little girl, just 9 years old, was carrying a kind of quiet wisdom that many adults never find. She wasn't trying to push away her sadness. She was learning to carry it, to walk with it, and to share joy anyway. She was doing what her father had done for her, lifting others, even in the darkest moments. He looked at her with admiration. There was something deeply humbling about it all. A child who had suffered such a loss. And yet here she was, comforting her mother, finding ways to smile, and holding tightly to the beautiful memories that made her heart ache and sing at the same time. And in that moment, it was clear. This wasn't just a conversation. It was something bigger. A quiet exchange of understanding between two people, one who had grown up with sorrow in the public eye, and another who was just beginning to learn what it meant to miss someone every single day. The bond between them deepened, not just through words, but through shared strength, shared silence, and the soft courage it takes to remember with love. But what does it mean when a child, bearing the weight of loss, becomes the one to comfort others? The memory they shared. The light in the church had shifted by the time William and Rosie stood to part ways. Outside, the clouds had broken just enough to let a sliver of sun reach through the stained glass, scattering soft colors across the pews. William lingered a moment longer, looking down at Rosie, the 9-year-old girl who had spoken of love and loss with a kind of truth that even the oldest hearts rarely find the words for. He crouched again, not wanting the moment to pass too quickly. "You've got a brave heart, Rosie," he said, his voice low and sure. "Never forget that." She nodded quietly, still clutching the silver coin in her palm like it was something sacred. That small token, once just a quiet companion in his own pockets, had become a bridge between his past and hers, between pain and peace, between a man and a child, both shaped by grief. As William stepped out of St. Mary's Church in Norfolk that April afternoon in 2024, the cool air wrapped around him gently. The scent of damp earth and spring flowers filled the breeze. Something had shifted inside him. It wasn't lightness, not quite, but a stillness. The kind that follows when something meaningful brushes against your soul and leaves it changed. Word of the exchange traveled faster than either of them could have expected. It didn't need headlines. It moved through quiet conversations and gentle retellings, passed from one person to the next in the small, close-knit community. Parishioners who had been sitting just a few pews away described it as something almost holy. Not in the sense of ritual or tradition, but in the way it revealed a deep, shared humanity. Elderly members of the congregation, who had watched decades of Sundays unfold within those stone walls, spoke of the encounter as one of the most touching moments they'd witnessed. Young couples with children of their own found themselves holding their little ones a bit tighter that evening. It was a story that reached people not because a royal figure was involved, but because it reminded them of something pure, what it means to truly see and comfort another person. For Rosie and her mother, that day would stay etched in their hearts. It wasn't just about meeting Prince William. It was about the way he had listened and made space for Rosie's memories. The way he had knelt beside her, not as a prince, but as someone who knew what it meant to miss a parent. The silver coin became more than a gift. It became a symbol of bravery, of connection, of not being alone in the silence of loss. At night, Rosie would hold it in her hands before bed, remembering his words. "Your daddy knows you miss him. He's always with you." It didn't erase the pain, but it gave her a sense of peace, a reminder that the love they shared still lived on, even if she couldn't see it. And for William, the image of Rosie's smile, so soft and luminous after such solemn words, would return to him again and again. In rooms filled with advisors and cameras, in ceremonies that demanded his attention. He would sometimes drift back to that quiet church, to the sound of a child's voice telling stories of her father's silly songs and park adventures. In her, he saw something he had once needed and found too rarely: honesty, warmth, and hope. That day reminded him that real strength doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it's found in the eyes of a little girl who misses her father and still finds the courage to smile. And in that brief, beautiful exchange, something lasting was born. An invisible thread between two people bound by memory, love, and the quiet power of compassion. But what do you think? How does Prince William's deep compassion for a grieving child reflect his care for every child in the nation? We'd like to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to share and stay tuned.